Hi, I'm Darrin Peppard. Welcome to the Leaning into Leadership podcast, the podcast dedicated to today's hardworking leader. Join me every Sunday for leadership insight, inspiration, and a little pep talk to keep you rolling down your road to awesome. Hey everybody, welcome into episode number 88 of the Leaning into Leadership podcast, brought to you by EverFi. My guest on the show today is a fellow executive leadership coach, consultant, and so forth. Her name is Beth Napleton. She is the founder of Beth Napleton Consulting. Beth offers senior leaders in education and at other mission-driven organizations a clear path to excellence through individual, executive, and group coaching experiences. What I love about Beth, and she said this so well that honestly, folks, I had to put it in the title of the show. Beth is all about helping clear out the adult problems that get in the way of student success. Beth is just doing some amazing work out there. She's also a certified Clifton Gallup Strengths Coach. And Beth and I had a really amazing conversation recently about working through those adult problems and actually repairing them at the break. It's a fantastic conversation, and you're going to hear it right on the other side of these messages. Hey leaders, today's podcast is sponsored by EverFi. EverFi provides districts, schools, and teachers with free digital resources to teach essential life skills like character development and financial education. That's right, I said free. EverFi partners with organizations like the United Way to give teachers hundreds of turnkey, standards-aligned lessons and 24/7 support. District and school administrators are supported with a suite of services like professional development and data reporting, all at no cost. Learn more at everfi.com/edleaders. That's everfi.com/edleaders.
Hey education heroes, this is Kyle Hill, founder of the Recharged Family and host of the Exhausted Educators Recharged podcast. I want to tell you about something amazing that's happening this summer called the Recharged Family Back to School Virtual Bash. Our Recharged Family team is working to put together over 50 workshops provided by educational leaders from across multiple continents. The idea here is that we're all working together to help you and educators everywhere get ready for the new school year. And an amazing feature of all this is it's all going to be video recorded workshops. You can watch them all year long. Registration opens up on July 1st, and as long as you register before August 1st, you'll get everything for $10. You can register at rechargefamily.com. That's rechargefamily.com.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. Explore more podcasts at www.teachbetterpodcastnetwork.com. Now let's get on to the episode.
So the most effective leaders are going to be those who can identify their strengths, but more importantly, understand their deficits and surround themselves with people who can complement those. That's one of the things we're going to talk about today on the Leading into Leadership podcast with my guest, Beth Napleton. Beth, welcome into the show.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Absolutely. I'm excited to have a conversation with you. Obviously, you and I got a chance to talk, I don't know, maybe 6 weeks ago or something along those lines. And really enjoyed that conversation, so I know this one will be really good with the record button pushed. So before we dive in, Beth, just really quick for my listening audience who maybe don't know who you are, give them a really quick 30-second, this is who Beth Napleton is.
Sure, absolutely. So I am a leadership coach and consultant, and I work with senior leaders in mission-driven organizations like schools and districts to help solve the adult problems that get in the way of students thriving. So as a classroom teacher for many years, I founded a charter school on the far south side of Chicago before going full-time onto my own. And now I work with leaders all over the country in all types of schools to help them lead more effectively.
I love that. So, obviously, you mentioned the South Side. So for my people who, are both familiar with Chicago and are Chicago sports fans, are you a Cubs fan or are you a White Sox fan?
Well, I've got a daughter who's a very strong Sox fan, and my South Side roots would say that. but I do what my dad says. I go wherever there are free tickets. So if you have free tickets for me, I will go to your baseball game.
That's a great answer right there. I love it. There you go. That's perfect. I love it. Love it. Okay, so let's do this. Let's maybe unpack a couple of things from what you talked about. I definitely want to get into the leadership coaching thing. Obviously, that's something that I do as well. So the more we can talk about that and really support leaders, the better. But I want to jump back to, you talked about being a classroom teacher. Let's just really quick. What were you at an elementary level? Were you a secondary level? Did you have a subject space? What was your focus?
I and like many teachers, I did it all over the course of my career. So I have done everything from pre-K through junior year of high school. I mostly was in middle grade. So I mostly was a 5th through 8th grade language, arts, and history teacher, a little bit of PE and film studies thrown in. But I started my career in elementary school in New York City, and then I worked in a charter school in rural North Carolina, helping grow middle school there before I founded my small charter network, which started with middle grades and then grew through 12th grade. So
you really have done it all.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I'm learning my own deficits. I've got 2 second graders now, and I never did second grade. And some of this, I'm like, what? So
second grade is, yeah, that's an interesting time right there, without question. So how does someone who taught in middle grades end up starting a charter school? How did that come about?
Yeah, great question. So I had the school I taught at in rural North Carolina, which was the second school I taught at, which was a charter school. And this is like back in 2002. So like there weren't, charters weren't widespread. There weren't a lot of them. It was, at least very new to me. And so it was really powerful because I actually worked with the same group of kids in 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. So they were the pride of 2011 because that was the year they were going to college. So this is, imagine in 2002 or 3, we started our journey together. And, or actually, no, maybe 2004 or 5. Anyway, I'm getting older. It's hard to kind of keep track, but they were in 5th
we all have
grade.
that.
Now, literally, I saw one who was visiting me who's now a dean at a law school. I mean, it's wild, right? Like I met her as a 5th grader. So it's been pretty neat, but that really helped me see just the power of when you have a great teacher in every class on the grade level. And then when that happens, grade level after grade level. And so I really thought this is something I love. And I truthfully would be at that school until this day, but it was in a town of 1,000 people and I'm kind of a city person. So at some point I felt like, okay, I love this school and I want to live someplace where I can get sushi for dinner. So how do I do both those things? And that kind of started, my dad used to say all the time, there are plenty of kids in Chicago who need you. And that's, where I'm from. So kind of circuitously led me. I was in North Carolina. And actually, I came to a school that looked very similar in Chicago in terms of the mission. But what I learned very quickly is that the principal had a very different leadership style. And even though the words on paper were similar about college for all students, the methods of getting there, I really disagreed with. And truthfully, she just wasn't super great at motivating and managing adults. And I really realized that I, at that time, had been in 3 different schools. And I saw 3 very different styles. And I saw some really good examples of what to do and a lot of examples of what not to do. And I just realized that I had so many friends leaving the profession, so many valued colleagues, because they weren't being led or managed well. And in some ways it makes sense. Like there are principals who are great classroom teachers, right? They get, elevated and move up, and leading adults is a totally different ballgame than teaching students. There are 100% similarities. But I mean, it's like, you train to be an Olympic diver on the 1 meter, springboard, and then you're on the 10-meter platform. It's like, this is a different sport, right? Right. So I was like, I need to learn about management, leading adults effectively, leading teams, if I want to stay in education. So I took a few years to then go work at the Teach for America Training Institute. So I ran their summer school in Los Angeles, trained 650 teachers who taught thousands of kids each summer. So I did that for a couple summers to help me build my management muscles before ultimately going to start a school.
That's awesome. I love that. So I want to go back to something that you were alluding to, and I think it'll take us down the coaching road here. But there is a massive difference in the skill set between being a school leader and being a classroom teacher. Classroom teachers are leaders. Don't misunderstand what I'm saying. I'm not saying that teachers aren't leaders. What I'm saying is the skill set that is required to to manage a classroom, to lead a classroom, to deliver quality instruction, to ensure quality learning is very different than the skill set necessary to lead adults, to develop a vision, to get people all, believing and living that vision, managing adults, managing adult behaviors. There's so many pieces there. So that I want to talk about that just a little bit more, because so many of the folks that I work with as a leadership coach, that's the big struggle is, yep, I've elevated into this role because I did a great job in the classroom. Somebody tapped me on the shoulder, said, hey, you should go into leadership. Here I am. But how do I grow this skill set? So let's talk about that a little bit. How do you support others in growing those skills or those management muscles, as you just kind of referred to?
Yeah.
How do you do that?
Well, great question. And I think that, there's kind of two hats I think about it. One is individual, right? Where it's like any coaching relationship, right? You develop a relationship, you gather some data, people figure out where they want to go, you build a trust, the environment of trust that you're able to kind of push and think about this. But honestly, and that can be helpful, but it's a little bit like the wall is leaking and you're putting your finger in it, right? You're just like trying to do the one thing and hope that everything goes okay. And so one of the things I'll do kind of with my consultant hat often is help, because what I find is like, there are not necessarily structured opportunities for people to gradually get those skill set, right? You kind of start drinking from a fire hose and you just hope it doesn't knock you over. And so what I will work with schools on is, there is a staircase of different opportunities, and you can, work on some of these muscles, getting someone aligned on the same vision from the perspective of a department chair or a grade level chair, right? You can do it as an instructional coach. You can do it leading PD and workshops. And so a lot of places in education, particularly, it's like, well, learn by doing, you'll kind of throw you into the fire, you'll figure it out. And a lot of people do well with that. Probably a lot of people listening do. Right. And a lot of people don't. And they're like, see ya, I'm going to go work in ed tech, right? I'm going to go travel the world. And so what I work with schools on is, look, how do we think about developing and setting up a leadership program? What are the milestones? What are the benchmarks? What are the skills you need so that you have an intentional process to help your folks develop internally, so that by the time you have an assistant principal opening, that your department chairs or your instructional coaches are ready for it, because you've articulated what it requires to be an instructional coach. You've articulated what it requires to be an AP. You know where the new material would be, and you know what they've already mastered from their other at-bats with it. So I think that there just is so much, of the, and the other thing, when you're a great classroom teacher, you're in your classroom, you're doing great. I remember one time my principal, Caleb, came to me when I was in North Carolina, and he, like, his hair was sticking up all over. He was like, what was going on in the building this afternoon? And I was like, what are you talking about? We did this like great Socratic seminar on this text. And, because I was in my room and I could shut the door and I had a lot of control over this. And then all of a sudden you're leading a wing of a school, you're leading the building, and, your good day, your day is only as good as the worst thing that happens in your building. And there are a lot of worse things that can happen in your building when there's 20, 30, 50 teachers, right? And so, and hundreds of kids. And so how do you help people start to gain that perspective, start to think about where their levers of influence are, stay regulated themselves to be able to work with folks, and also just transfer some of those skills that might be similar as a teacher, right? Motivating, influencing others, but they look a little bit different with adults.
Whether you're selecting resources and curriculum mapping, or you're organizing PD days and analyzing data, administrators, you have a lot on your plate. So why not lighten the load by working with EverFi? It costs you nothing, really. EverFi provides 100% free essential skills resources and services to over 11,000 school districts, thanks to partners like the NFL and the United Way. Their standards-aligned resources focus on things like college and career readiness, character development, financial literacy, health, wellness, and other pivotal topics for long-term student success. Check out the free digital resources yourself at everfi.com/edleaders. In addition to hundreds of free lessons, EverFi provides school leaders with a dedicated team who will align EverFi's resources to your curriculum maps, create tailored learning sessions for your next PD day, integrate EverFi's free platform with ClassLink and Clever, and provide you with regular data reporting and 24/7 support, all at no cost. Man, I wish I had known about EverFi when I was a school leader. Go to everfi.com/edleaders to see why admin and teachers love partnering with EverFi. Then schedule a meeting to bring EverFi's free resources and support to your district. That's everfi.com/edleaders. Yeah, I think that's huge. I mean, and kind of where you're going there too, though, is helping them. I love how you said it. Understanding where their levers of influence are, because so often, I think early career leaders, they get into the role, and unless they've had some really good experience leading them to that role, they're really not sure, what to do. Okay, I've set up my office. I've got a plant in my office. I've got my keys on a lanyard. I'm ready. But now what do I do? Right. And it's like they wait around for the fire. Okay, I'm a total firefighter. I'm sitting here at the fire station waiting for what's going to come next. And that's just being so very reactive. And honestly, that's how I was. I think my first year as a principal, you talk about drinking from the fire hose. I was 40 feet underwater. The snorkel did not reach to the air. I had to have the scuba gear on. I was so far underwater. And I think that happens so often with those early career leaders who just, they don't understand how to get to utilizing their levers of influence, because they're just so focused on, I've got to solve everybody's problems. I got to put out all the fires. How do you get people into that? Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, everyone is coming to you too, right? I mean, I do think that there are some positions in this world where, it's like if somebody's in the store, it's like, I want to see the manager, right? I mean, they might not know if this store at the mall, does the manager have any influence? Is the manager in charge of this? They don't know, but they want to see the manager. It is in a school. Everybody wants to see the principal. It doesn't matter if it is tardy, an absence, a reason, if it's really in the athletic director's department. And I think that can be really overwhelming, because you're sitting there and people are coming to you with fires. And I think that one of the things that people start to look around and say, and often where I'll work with people in some of my coaching work too, and in the consulting as well, say, okay, let's look around at all this stuff. Like, what's yours? What's your APs? What's your operations person? Where are the decision-making rights? Let's get clear on where the roles are, right? What about your math department chair, right? If the school is picking a new curriculum, do you want a voice in that, right? And your math, my math department already, they went ahead and picked it. Well, how do you walk that back and say, actually, no, I'm the instructional leader of the school? Or actually, no, you are the instructional decision maker. I mean, I think the answer can be different in every school and every community. But what I often find is that leaders just don't know. And so a lot of times our work is about, what do I believe? What do I think? And because we're in the sacred space of the coaching room, where it is private and it is, you can be no filter and you can say what you mean and you can wonder things without worrying about if your, competence will be called into question. People are able to kind of puzzle that out. I've been working with a leader, Jeremy, at a school in Durham, North Carolina. And we just finished up 6 months together. We're about to start another 6 months of work doing what I call coach-salting. So it's kind of part coaching, part consulting. And so that means I take on some of the to-dos at the end of the session. If it's coaching, they take on all the to-dos, right? So it's kind of a blend, but I'll help build roles and responsibilities. I'll help create team retreat agendas and things like that, because we all know that time is such a huge issue, right? And so how do you create more time for these busy leaders? And one of the things that we worked on for, from October through March was, what do I really believe? And it was really exciting to see him realize, look, I care a lot about instruction. And there's kind of this word on the street about me that I'm a culture guy because I was a dean of students before this, but I care about kids learning and I care about kids having access to rigorous materials and I care about kids being supported. And I think this is all really connected to culture. And by the way, I don't really care that much about operations. I've got a great operations person and she can run that show so that I can spend my time in instruction and culture. So I think it's been really, I've gotten a few emails from his boss, the executive director, and from some of his colleagues saying I just see such clarity, such purpose. And I think that I'm so glad that he invested in giving himself the time and space to start to figure this out, right? Because it is so, there's never a time in the firehouse where it is, just sit and think. But in some ways, if I've got a Zoom call or if I've got a phone call, it's going to build in that time to think that I so desperately need as a leader, right? Because no one's ever coming in your schedule and saying, and now is your contemplation time, right? That might be your commute home, maybe, if you're not calling parents and, making sure that things are arranged and picking up dinner.
Right. Well, that's really a good point too. But and even though you say it tongue in cheek, those are the types of things that people the really good leaders are putting time on their calendar for, whether it's for professional reading or it is for some reflection time. And I talk, listeners of the podcast know this. I talk all the time about, that balcony level leadership. Let's go check in on ourselves. How are we doing here, and here, those types of things. And the more intentional leaders are about that kind of stuff, the more successful they'll be. And they'll actually be able to, actually move from being that firefighter to being the leader. And the truth is this, some of that getting stuck in the firefighter mode, especially, early in the career, it kind of feels good. It's like, hey, I'm being effective. I'm solving people's problems. But at a point, really good leaders start to understand, hey, what I really should be doing is empowering people to solve their own problems. And then I can start to get to the stuff that really, truly matters. I love how you talked about, the one you're working with being able to just delegate operations. Hey, I don't like that stuff. It's not my wheelhouse. You're good at this. You take that. And so that kind of takes me a little bit into, you and I were talking before we hit the record button about identifying our strengths. And I know you're certified in the Clifton Strengths Finder and some of those types of things. Let's talk a little bit about how, one, maybe we'll talk a little bit about Strengths Finder, but two, then let's talk a little bit about how do leaders, or what should leaders do to best align themselves with people who complement their deficits with their own strengths.
I think there's a lot there, and there's so much good stuff to dig into. So for listeners who don't know, the Clifton Gallup Strengths Assessment, I think I'm getting that name right, but I might have gotten a few of those proper nouns mixed up, is from the Gallup corporation, which you probably heard of from surveys and opinion polls and presidential approval ratings. But they basically have been working, they started doing some research in the 50s about kind of our nature, nurture, are you born with these things or were they developed? And what's really great about this is they've taken the resources of this large corporation and they've drilled it down into an assessment. And I know you've taken it, I've taken it multiple times in our career, and it can tell you what comes to you with ease, excellence, and enjoyment, right? And so I think that as human beings, we are hardwired to focus on our deficits. We just are, right? It's like how we survived saber-toothed tigers, right? Is that we were able to see the deficits and run. We would not be here evolutionarily if we had been like, what a cute tiger, let me give it a hug, right? And so
right.
There's a good reason for it. It's not you. You are human. You're hardwired for this. And what their belief is that when we, number one, know our strengths and they give you a full report and it has lots of definitions and there are books, a whole series of books that are really helpful. But when you do an assessment like this assessment or any other, and you have some common language, you can do some reading about what this means, about where your blind spots, you start to know yourself better. And their belief is, look, we all have limited time and energy. You have X number of hours you can put into your development. You could put into areas that are weaknesses for you or deficits, and you'll improve. But you'll hit a ceiling. And if you take that same number of hours and put them into your strengths, like the sky is the limit, right? And so why not lean into ease, excellence, and enjoyment? And so when you think about one of the things I work when I do strengths coaching with clients is we know your strengths. And then now let's think about your challenges. So if your challenge is, working, getting parent buy-in in your community, you are going to approach it differently if you have influencing strengths as opposed to strategic strengths or executing strengths. And so, and those are the broad domains. They're not the specific strengths that the report goes into. But I think that it is about, look, you could have 5 principals, all 5 of them need help with parent buy-in. They might approach it 5 different ways, and it's totally fine because it's about getting to the right outcomes and results. The important thing is doing what works for you. You'll feel happier, you'll be more energized, and you'll see better results because you're really good at it. Right? Even if you don't even recognize you're good at it, often I'll find people think, this is just the way everyone is. Everyone's so strategic. It's not a surprise to hear you talk about balcony level leadership because really, I know strategic is in your top 5 strengths. We talked about that before. And that is about pulling up to the 20,000.
Actually, number one.
Yeah. And so for you, it's like probably like breathing, right? It's like, let me pull up what's the landscape here? Where am I going? What am I doing? Right. Yeah. And that doesn't, it comes so naturally to you. And that's something that other people have to work on a little bit more. Right. I used to have, and then speaking to your point about deficits. So then, I used to do strength finders for myself, and then we do it with the leadership team and the whole team. We'd have a little grid that we'd look at. And when I was facing a change or a decision, I would go down my list and I'd be like, well, Tracy is strategic. Tracy, come in here and let me run this idea by you. What do you see that I don't? Because I know you're going to see different things because you bring strategic to the mix just naturally in how you see the world. And it would be very hard for me to figure that out. So instead, I'm going to use my number 1 strength, which is activator, which is about go, 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 get things started, keep it moving. And I'll pull you into a meeting. I'll get this moving. I'll get this going. I'll bring that contagious enthusiasm, and I'll be able to use your strengths to help balance it so that we don't, start implementing a plan that has some obvious holes or whatever the case might be.
It's such a super powerful tool to be able to sit down with your leadership team and know where each person's strengths really lie. So often, I think when we think about leadership teams, it's like there's a job description. A simple example, as a school principal, yes, I was the principal, but then I had an assistant principal who was in charge of curriculum instruction, special programs. I had an assistant principal who was in charge of discipline and attendance, and I had an assistant principal who was in charge of athletics, activities, and operations. So what fits in their job descriptions aren't the things you find when you do the Strengths Finder. What you find in Strengths Finder is, what is Tom really good at? What is Annie really good at? And exactly how you described it, Beth, we're working on a project or something like that. You know what? In this particular space, Tom is the one who brings the absolute best strength to the table. Let's, give him the opportunity to lead, or at least take that portion or get his perspective so that, as a collective group, it's not sitting on one person's shoulders simply because it's in their job description. I think it's huge, right? I mean, and the whole idea of working to your strengths. I was an athletic coach for a long time. The last thing I would ever do with a basketball team is have them take the floor and let's run things they're not good at. Why would we do that, right? I know what we're really good at, and we're going to try to do that. If the other team, their job is to try and take that away from us. But if we know what we're good at, why wouldn't we lean into that? But so many leaders don't do that, do they?
No, I think it goes in some ways to this human piece that, people are conscious of their own gaps and they want to make up for it, and they feel like everyone can see them and what's happening. When really it's about how do you, I think to your point, like, look, we're a team, we have shared goals, and we should be able to, just like, I think about, people who are married, right? It's unusual that everybody would cook and everyone would clean. They divide it. When someone cooks, someone cleans, right? Someone does breakfast, someone does dinner. However you personally have it work for you, it's the same thing with your leadership team at a school. Hey, I just worked with a school team, and one of the people really was somebody who, she had relationship building strengths, and relationship building strengths need a lot of one-on-one interaction. And because of her position, they would often have her at the assembly or at whatever, greet everyone. And she hated it because that's really in the influencing domain. An influencer loves that, loves the stage, loves to get up there and communicate to groups. Relationship building strengths like the one-on-one. And so it was like such an aha moment in this leadership team meeting where they were like, oh, let's switch roles. Our job titles might say who's on the stage and who's greeting parents at the door. But because of what we enjoy, we're going to switch. And when I went back to them afterwards and said, how did it go? Guess what? They left with more energy. They were more excited. They couldn't wait for the next one, right? And so it is also about how do we spend our days doing things that we are really good at and that make us feel really good, because that's going to make us able to do our jobs for longer, right? Which is a good thing for kids everywhere.
Absolutely. Well, and I think another thing too, I'll try and take this, tangentially into another topic I know we want to get into. So I think sometimes when we really think deeply about our strengths and we think about the skills that are necessary in order to be a successful school or district level leader, one of the things that gets overlooked is managing adult behaviors. And sometimes it's the crazy behaviors that you see from adults, but it's not always that. Sometimes it's again, it's back to influencing. It's helping people see and believe in a vision and believe in kind of this potential positive change for down the road. When you're working with leaders, what are some things that you kind of coach them to manage and work with adult behavior?
Mm-hmm. So usually we start, when I work with clients, talking about kind of what brought them to me, right? And sometimes it will be about a general pervasive sense of some cultural issues in their building. People aren't really responding to feedback well, for example, or I've got a vocal contingent of people who think I am not qualified to do my job, right? Like you name the problem. And then we'll go through initially kind of a diagnosis phase. Sometimes I'll do surveys. Sometimes I do one-on-one interviews. Sometimes we just continue to talk and gather information. Sometimes I'll even do a site visit and kind of be like, well, I want to know, like, what's really going on? Because a lot of times people think it's an issue with their entire school. And really, if we want to make the most impact, we can kind of boil it down to a few key players and work on clear roles and responsibilities, working towards goals, decision-making rights, where folks are at. So we do those things to kind of say, look, maybe you thought it was a culture issue, but actually there are some issues with how your team is functioning. Let's make your team more functional, and then we'll be able to fix your culture. Sometimes you're like, kick the tires and the team's working great and everything really is firing all cylinders. And it really is about, it has become acceptable. And this is happening so much to schools, I think, after coming back to in-person after the pandemic, kind of different behaviors, different, things are happening. And people are like, wait, I feel like before I would have been able to nip this in the bud, but now I don't really know how because of where talent turnover is across the sector and how do I handle this? But I know that people are, we've become a very complainy culture, and I don't want a complainy culture, right? And so I'll work with them on what is your vision? What are people doing? What does it look and sound and feel like? And we'll get really clear on that for the leader if we're dealing with kind of an issue across culture. And then what we'll do, and this is counterintuitive, is that we'll start small. I think sometimes there's we have to do these big plans and these big ideas, and it's got to really make a splash. And there can be a role for that. But what I find is that to shift culture, when you start with really small actions, it can actually make a huge difference. And so, for example, I worked with one client, right, who runs an alternative high school. And, she kept saying how it just seemed like, nobody was happy to be there. And then, of course, kids didn't feel happy to be there. And so she started this kind of silly challenge about smiling every time you saw someone in the hallway. And we structured it, and I helped her set it up, and we did this. And it was like, let's do this for a week, right? Let's do a challenge for the week, and who can get these things. And the vibe massively shifted with that small action, right? I'm not asking people to take a 6-hour PD. You don't have to read this book. It's like, if you see someone in the hallway, can you just smile at them? And, that gave us a building block to then go to the next part of the plan. And so I think that a lot of times with leaders, it feels like we have to do these huge plans. We have to figure this out, when really, once we get clear on what we want, we can distill a few key actions that we can then lead others towards, and then start to build some momentum, get some quick wins, and then start to say, well, now that I have a building where everyone, smiles at each other and is human, now let's start to think about how we can dig into our next big priority.
Absolutely. Now, I think that's a real big piece right there, that just simply starting with one simple action, whether it's smiling or saying hi to people in the hallway or whatever, can really make a big difference. And just as individual leaders, there's so much you want to be able to control, but the truth is you really can only control yourself. So getting that clarity, I love how you talk about clarity. That's one of my big pieces too, is clarity, and then be intentional about those things you're clear about. When you can do that, man, it's amazing. And, again, when it comes down to what you can control, it's really just you. So you show up, put a smile on your face all by itself. That starts to begin a good movement.
There's a ripple effect from that. Exactly.
Absolutely, there is. Yeah. So let's do this, Beth. Let's go ahead and jump into. We could talk about this all day, but let's jump to the final question here on the podcast that I ask everybody that joins me here on Leaning Into Leadership. What is it right now, Beth, that you're doing to lean into leadership?
Yeah. So, two things really come to mind. One is that I'm a voracious reader, and so I continue to read all the time. And I will sometimes find myself using my strengths training and guessing which strengths the characters would have if, they were real. So I do that. And then the other thing I'm really excited about, when I worked in schools, I mostly worked in schools where I, as a white woman, was in the minority compared to the student population and the family population. And so I did a lot of work on my own identity, both in terms of gender and race, by virtue of being in schools. And now that I work, largely with myself or over Zoom one-on-one with clients, there's less so. So I just joined a professional learning community that's specifically about white women kind of deconstructing their identity and thinking about how it impacts their way of seeing the world. And that's been really, it's great to be back in a PLC, right? It's been a long time since I've been able to participate in a PLC, and that feels like a really great way to develop and continue to grow as a leader.
I love that. I think so many people would associate PLC only in, the language arts department or the math department or whatever the case may be. And to hear you say that, so I'm part of I guess we'll call it a PLC as well, of educator entrepreneurs, and we get together for a little over an hour once a week and be able to learn from each other. And really that's what a PLC is really all about. I love that you went there with that. That's extremely cool. Man, so much good stuff. How is it that when people want to get in touch with you, because they will, how do they get in touch with you and reach out and have their own conversation with Beth?
Yeah. So a couple things. One is that I actually have just developed a quiz for leaders to help them determine what they most need in their leadership, either for themselves individually or their team. And that's at leadership-quiz.com. So if you go there, you can take my quiz, see what you need, and that'll help get you on my email list and stay in touch in that way. I also have a bunch of information on my website, bethnapleton.com, and on Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook. So I'm always trying some new things, some new videos, but I love hearing from leaders. I love thinking about, folks who might be interested in coaching or coach-sulting or professional development or whatever it might be, because the job in the leader's chair is so important, and it can be so lonely and so isolating. And I think that's part of the joy of our work, is that we can help make it a little bit less so and help people see that balcony view and be more impactful.
Yeah, absolutely. Now that's fantastic. I will make sure, folks, that all of that stuff is linked in the show notes for you. So if you didn't quite catch that website, no worries. It's in the show notes for you. I'll also make sure and drop a link to the Clifton Strengths Finder book, so you can go check that out. Go do your strengths and let us know. Let us know what your strengths are, because it's huge. It really is. I've taken it at least 3 times. I have 2 of my results here in front of me. I know I have another one. I'm not sure where it is. I've probably got 10 copies of this book laying around the house. But we'll make sure all that stuff's in the show notes for you folks. Beth, thank you so much for joining me here on Leaning Into Leadership.
Oh, thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
All right, folks, I told you that was an awesome conversation with Beth Napleton. Make sure you're checking out all of her awesome stuff. I did link the leadership quiz right there in the show notes for you, along with the Clifton Strengths Finder. So get in there and check all that stuff out. And again, thank you, Beth, for coming on the show. And now it's time for a pep talk. So about a week ago, I released a blog post titled Welcoming New Staff, 3 Quick Tips for Leaders. And oh my goodness, folks, the response has just been overwhelming. People really love the 3 tips that I've shared, but they've also shared some of their own tips, which is exactly what I was hoping for. So many of you are brand new leaders this fall, or maybe you're in a new role, or if nothing else, you have new people joining your team. I highly doubt anybody has every single person back from last year. So nonetheless, you've got to be ready to welcome your new staff. So let me just reiterate this, because these 3 things, holy cow, it really, really kickstarted a great conversation. So here you go. This is what I would suggest, along with probably 100 others. But here you go. Number 1, do some social media introductions with your staff. Get their faces out there in front of others. It's an opportunity for them to then follow back or friend or connect with, whatever term or phrase it is for the different social media platforms. But it gives them an opportunity to get connected with other people in the space, whether that's other educators or people in your community. So use that social media platform. So many people are going to see it, and it's going to give them an opportunity when they see those faces in the grocery store, when they see those faces out and about, that they can just say, hey, hi, welcome. We'd love to see you here in our community. Number 2, hold a new staff academy. Do some things where everybody gets an opportunity to do a little bit of work and kind of get caught up and brought up to speed on all the things that you expect, so that when everybody else comes, your returning staff, maybe a week later, they have already heard this. And so it's not the first time through. Think about it, man. When you're a brand new teacher and you're starting a brand new job, it is like drinking from the fire hose. So give them that information when it's just them and the other brand new to you folks. They can ask questions. They don't have to feel like, I can't ask this question. I don't want to look stupid. They're in a room full of people who are all brand new, right? So do that new staff academy. Allow them to get caught up on some things, kind of get a good, comfortable feel, because then when it's everybody's back, they're not going to feel overwhelmed. And number 3, and this is the one that, holy moly, everybody just kept hitting me on this one. We had this crazy idea one year. You know what? How about we just give all of our new staff a $100 open purchase order to one of our different office supply stores. Go get what you need. Yes, we have a lot of that stuff, but you know what? Maybe there's something special that you really want. Well, go get it. Here's a $100 purchase order. You go down to the local, office supply store, get the things you really feel like you want for your classroom. It really isn't a big deal. It doesn't cost you much. I mean, you're just taking that out of your budget, so plan ahead for it. And you know what? It makes them feel special. Makes them feel like, wow, I really have a special place here. Because, folks, those initial days, those are what really matter. That's when you're starting to build those early relationships and letting people know, hey, in our school, you are going to feel seen and heard and valued and trusted. Hey, it makes a big difference, folks. So go check out the blog post. Go look at all the comments that people made on all the different social media platforms, and just get out there and have a Road to Awesome day. Thanks for joining me this week on Leaning Into Leadership. Thank you for listening to the Leaning Into Leadership podcast, brought to you by Road to Awesome. Don't forget, click subscribe, give a review, and share this with somebody who might also enjoy leaning into leadership.